Peter, thanks for joining me on the program again. We have spoken a couple of times before on the podcast, and I've got to say, one of the reasons that I like to keep having you back is because your books are so nourishing. I think a lot of folks know, Mission Drift, of course. I don't know if you would say that's your most famous book, but it's certainly the one that puts you on the map. And now, these subsequent books, I have come to view them almost as a curriculum in leadership. I don't know how that hits you. I'd be curious, in fact, as to how that description fits you, but or hits you rather. But do you kind of view it that way when you write a new book? Do you try to think about how it fits into what you said before?
Warren, that's incredibly kind. And I have not thought about it exactly that way. And when I start a book project, and I really do love the research, I love the writing, I love going on the journey with others. But I always start out with a question, not an answer. And so I've never written anything that I would say I'm an expert in. I've always written about things that I am curious to learn about. And so Mission Drift, it wasn't that I had figured out how do we stop Hope International from drifting. It's that I saw organizations all around me walking away from what mattered. And I wanted to say, how do we make sure that is not Hope International's story? So I'm so appreciate your comments, but maybe that is reflective of the fact that these are the questions that I'm asking as we try to lead, as we try to learn at Hope International.
Well, one of the ideas that you talked about in Mission Drift, but you begin this book with is this idea of drift. In fact, I think the opening chapter after some preliminaries is the danger of drift. You essentially say that drift is the default position, both for organizations and individuals, and that if you're not intentional, you will drift. Do I have you right in that?
You have it exactly right. Yeah. And I mean, that's why we like the word drift, that it is slow, it is subtle. And as we started to do the research, we heard this same theme on multiple different occasions. And it was something of, all of a sudden I realized, or all of a sudden I found myself, or all of a sudden our organization was facing this crisis. But it was never all of a sudden. It was always small compromises. It was always small steps. And then it just is compounded by time. And so it really got our attention. Small decisions, small actions, small thoughts, they are not small in consequence or impact when compounded by time.
Well, that's right. And there's the old the old saying, I guess you will, if you start out on a long journey and you're just your compass heading is just 1 or 2 degrees off, may seem small, but by the time you get to your destination way downstream, it's a huge deal. Um, one of the metaphors that recurs in the book is this idea of rowing. You've got a canoe, as a little canoe graphic as a chapter head on all of your chapters there. Can talk a little bit about that as a visual or a metaphorical idea that makes some of the points that you're making in this book.
Yeah, well, I grew up with parents that taught me the love of the outdoors. And several summers we would go to Maine and do the Allagash White Waterway, or head up to Canada to be on the lakes. And again, the analogy of drift. You don't have to spend a lot of time in a canoe to know that if you just put your paddle down, you just sit back, you just relax. There's one thing that I guarantee: you will not stay in the same place. You are moving even if you don't recognize it. And oftentimes it's when you eventually look up and you find that place on shore that you begin to realize just how far you've gone, just how much you've drifted, even when you might not even realize just how far you've gone. So if that's how drift happens, then the better question is, so what does it take? And this is where the analogy we think is pretty good. If you're in a boat, if you're of any sort, you got to know where you're heading. You got to have that point, and you have to constantly be recalibrating, constantly making the minor adjustments in alignment with where it is that you want to go. And it also takes work. You will not drift anywhere that is the place that you want to go. To get to the destination that you want, that's going to take work. And so I think those two elements, it works as an analogy of saying, what does a life look like? Your life. What is a life well lived? And then today, what is the work that we're doing to make sure that we are constantly rowing our boat or paddling our canoe in alignment with that destination. And for me, it just really raised the awareness of small decisions that I make today have so much significance in the longer term journey of our life.
You just mentioned an idea that I want to explore just a little bit, and that is the idea of a life well lived. You talk about early in the book uh, an exercise that you went through of writing your own eulogy. And in fact, you made that exercise one of the exercises, I think, in that first chapter of writing a eulogy. How did you come? What was that experience like for you? How did you get there, and why was that so powerful for you?
Yeah, I think there were a couple reasons. One is it was a profound experience to be in the hospital room with my grandfather when he went from this life to the next, and watching the reaction of my grandmother. I mean, they did life well together. They truly did. And little fanfare and great faithfulness is just how he lived. And you can't help but have a moment like that and not also then do a little bit of reflection. Where is my life headed? And what really matters. And I really appreciate how David Brooks wrote about the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And those are two very different things. And so I thought I might actually put that into practice and say, what do I hope is true of my life? What do I hope is said at the end? And again, not just writing it. I wrote it on a Saturday morning, and my wife came down. It was a Saturday morning, and she asked me what I was doing. And I told her I was writing my eulogy. I didn't give any other explanation, and she got very concerned in that moment. So I should have given a little more context, but it was powerful. And not just that, but then I put it on my calendar. And again, this might be a little bit odd, but every year it's on my calendar on my birthday. And I read it again and say, where do I need to make calibrations? Where do I need to, if that's what I say matters, is my life today in alignment? And I would say for everyone, if you want to write two important documents, one, write your eulogy. That helps you figure out what it looks like. And number two is, and write your resignation letter. It is so easy for us to spend all of our energy and activity and thinking about our current role and not remembering that there's going to be a day that that will be passed on to someone else. And what do you hope to be true at that moment as well? So incredible clarification to your point, Warren. That clarifies the destination and it creates a waypoint on the journey. Those two letters were powerful, powerful experiences to write them.
Well, I want to come back to that idea of writing your resignation in a little bit, Peter, before we close here, and because it does reinforce the idea that we're all that we don't own this, we don't own anything, that we're all just stewards, that our tenure in whatever leadership role we have is an interim role and so I want to come back to that idea to kind of close our conversation with, and also want to just stipulate for the record that we're not going to be able to cover all the content, great content that you've got here in this book, but I do want to hit a couple of high points, or at least ideas for me, and I also want to talk about the structure of the book, because when that exercise of writing a eulogy was a powerful physical activity that keeps an important abstract idea in mind. That idea is starting with the end in mind, and you sort of make that idea become real by sitting down and writing your own eulogy. It keeps that sort of abstract idea right in front of you and makes it very physical. As you said, you even revisit it every year. And you do that with every chapter in the book. You have content, of course, and that could be in danger of being abstract. I'm not saying it is, but it could be in danger of being abstract. One of the things I like about the content is that you also begin every chapter with a story, often a story of a leader who has fallen. You mentioned Ravi Zacharias and J.P. Yohannan and many others. But then at the end of the chapter, there are two things that I thought was just brilliant. One is an exercise, and at the end of chapter one, the exercise of writing a eulogy. But the other is a prayer. And I want you to just pause a minute and tell me about those prayers, because they're beautiful. You didn't write them, though. And how did you decide that that needed to be an essential part of this book?
Hmm. Yeah, that is a high compliment, Warren, on both of those points. But the first is, there are theologians, there are academics that have written about these topics, and I am so grateful for them. We drew on them, we learned from them. I am a practitioner. We started by why do we write this book? It's because we want to learn and we want to do. And really, in the book, there's this danger. I was struck so many times by it is easier to know more than we obey. It is easy to know more than we do. And so, as you said, a lot of these are not new ideas that no one has ever thought of about what it looks like to live a life of great faithfulness. It's not like we could not just among us come up with a list of really important ideas. The question is, how do we put them into practice? And so for every single chapter, that was really where we wanted to end, is identify the issue and then give some suggestions of how to put this into practice. So we know isolation is dangerous. That was a constant theme. We know that the more issues you have in your life that no one else knows about, that should be a blinking red light. That is a danger zone. But how do you actually have the friendships where those ideas are actually addressed? And that's where we got interesting of how do we put this into practice? And the constellation map of relationships just as one example, a practical way to put a concept into practice. So that was number one, as you said. But the second is all of these efforts, if we're trying to do them in our own strength, we just are not going to have the sheer willpower. We're not going to have the ability. And I find it so interesting, again, that prayer is this gift that we are given. And a lot of it comes from the previous book that we did called Lead with Prayer with Ryan Skoog and Cameron Doolittle and Jill Heisey. And really, this was just coming out of that project of the power of prayer and wanting to make sure at the end of every chapter there is time and words for reflection, for prayer, because we can't do this on our own. We need help. We need to cry out for God's guidance. And again, I just love Psalm 139. It's like, search me and know me. See if there's like, show me where I'm drifting, is the Peter paraphrase. But it's like, help me in understanding where we might be going off track. And so every chapter, a practice and a prayer as a way of putting these ideas, hopefully, into practice. And again, Warren, the stat of 1 out of 3 leaders finish well is haunting to me. It's haunting. And so I just want to say, what do we do to change that? How can we see many more leaders live on mission, live and serve faithfully? And for me, it's that practice and prayer as vital parts of identifying the issues and then being equipped to do something about it.
Peter, in the middle part of the book, you have two sections: part two, misguided pursuits, and part three, strong currents. Again, we can't unpack all of those, but the misguided pursuits are achievement, the allure of achievement, the mastery of money, the pursuit of pleasure, the problem with power, and the quest for control. I think a lot of people would probably maybe come to those problems, if you will, those misguided pursuits. They might be able to guess them. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. I mean, those are kind of hiding in plain sight in Scripture. The thing that I found most valuable or and really eye-opening for me was that you proposed an antidote to those that often was surprising to me. So, for example, the allure of achievement, which was the first misguided pursuit, you talked about the idea of belovedness, which would be an antidote to that, or the mastery of money. The antidote was generosity. And this was one that really hit me near the end. The last one, the quest for control, was trust. And it's not just, I mean, it's obviously trusting God, but it's also trusting in your team, trusting in the people around you, trusting in your community. And as I read those again, in some ways they were they were both, of course, but surprising at the same time. Um, and really, really eye-opening for me. How did you come to those ideas?
Hmm. I mean, Warren, you more than anyone, you have seen a constant stream of leaders who have lost their way.
Yeah.
And it is variations on some common themes,
Yeah.
right? And it really is. It's common themes. And I love what you said. It's new. You know, the danger though is when we read the next story and we think, I can't believe they did that, as opposed to stopping and saying, Lord, help me not to do that. The minute we look at the other without looking in the mirror and saying, where, not if, where am I drifting? And I think all of us, we're going to have certain propensities to certain areas of drift. And we could look at all of those. And my guess is our spider graph is going to be different. Some are really going to be, it's going to be the money and control, and some it's going to be the power. And we all have the areas that we need to pay even more attention to. But then the interesting piece was to look at not only how did these cause individuals to go off track, but then we started having conversations with people that had lived faithfully. And some did the biography, some we learned from people, and some individuals that we look up to. And again, the quest for control and the power one, it was so interesting to hear stories of individuals that did things that their position, it didn't make sense for them. And I always thought about servant leadership as, this is the right way to lead. This is the right way to impact the organization. I never realized that that model of foot washing, that model of taking a position that is beneath your rung in the org chart, that is actually good for your heart. That we need that, not just the organization, not just the spillover benefit, but we need to do that for our own. We need to get off the high horse and start grabbing a shovel and walking behind the horse. Like that is good for our hearts. That is good for
Right.
our lives. And so we just tried to understand not only the problem, but then what do we see in the individuals that lived and served differently, and then to try and figure out what's the practice to do a similar model. And again, that's what Jesus said. He washed his disciples' feet, and then what does he say? Go and do likewise. And we want to take that literally in our culture, in our day. What would it look like for us to take Jesus seriously and to do what he said? And this is where the heartbreaking thing, Warren, is nothing in here is going to be like, oh, I never thought of it. It's just like we know more than we actually put into practice. And that, I think, is the greatest danger. We know what to do, but slowly over time, we just walk away from doing it.
Yeah, no, I really picked that up loud and clear, and which is one of the reasons why I love the exercises at the end of each chapter, because it really it was practice, and saying those prayers, reading those prayers slowly at the end of each chapter was a meaningful experience for me as I read through your book. So, okay, as I've already said a couple of times, to belabor the point, we can't cover it all, Peter, in the short amount of time. The misguided pursuits we've already mentioned: achievement, money, pleasure, power, and control. But you also have another chapter called strong currents. And that this is kind of where I'd like to land this plane. Those strong currents are the need for speed, the island effect, and self at the center. Those are the problems. And the need for speed, you say we can solve by just slowing down. And I know before we turned on the record, I mentioned to you that I'm going on vacation next week, and I was fascinated by the fact that you commended me for that. You commended me for it's like, okay, well, have fun, Warren, but no, you actually commended me for it. And I guess I kind of know where that comes from, because I don't take vacations as often as I should. And I'm guessing that you have probably run into that in your own life, right?
Uh, did I mention at the beginning that I write not as someone who's figured this out, but who wants to? I'm with you. It's hard, and I think it's tough when we really believe in the work that we're doing. We
Yeah.
really, it's rewarding. It's hard, of course, and it's difficult, and yet it also is fulfilling, and it is really easy. And the need for speed, this is so interesting. I actually was just with a friend last week, and this is an individual who has a hobby and he loves high speed cars. And this is what he said. He said, I was on the track for 45 minutes. And he said, I looked at the speedometer exactly 3 times in 45 minutes. Now, why? Because his full focus was on a very small window because he was going so fast. It was only the small window that was right in front of him. And I think that is a dangerous place. How many of the leaders that we profile like they are going so fast and they are doing, especially it sometimes is more difficult to see when it's ministry, related, or their church, or the nonprofit, or they're really having this wonderful impact. And what they don't do when they're going so fast? Look to the left and say, what is the impact on the people that are closest to me? They don't look inside. They don't look down and say, what's the impact on me? How is my soul doing? I'm running ragged right now. This is not a good spot to be in. I'm starting to slip into some bad patterns of thinking that I deserve, like this is not good, but we don't have time because we're going so fast. And this is where I don't think there's anything revolutionary. I think it's just really hard to put into practice
Yeah.
today. How much time were you disconnected from your phone and truly get your internal RPMs down enough to pause, to wait, to listen, to seek? How much time? And then 1 out of 7, what does it look like? And then 1 out of 52, what does it look like to completely unplug? Not revolutionary, Warren, but powerful if we put it into practice. Are we doing it on a daily, weekly, and annual basis? And my guess is most leaders, if they're honest, it has been a very long time since they got their internal RPMs to actually look up, look around, see the impact on themselves and others. And again, that is part of drift. We've got to understand when and where drifts happen. And the sooner that we realize that, the easier it will be to course correct. The easiest time to address a tree, it's when it's an acorn. The most difficult time, it's when you've been ignoring it for 50 years. That's a
Yeah.
very difficult, costly, time consuming. And so that's really what we're saying is the need for speed. It is dangerous. We've got to figure out the practices to slow down and say, Lord, search me, know me, see where I'm getting off track, and in your grace, bring me back.
Peter, we've only got a couple minutes left, but I did want to just mention that it seems the related issue is this idea of friendship. You said that one of the strong currents that cause drift is a lack of friendship, the island effect. And Jesus said that even to his own servants, up until now, I'll call you my servants, but now I'll call you my friend. In some ways, friendship is one of those ideas that's sort of hiding in plain sight in Scripture. That it's like the capstone experience of the Christian life is friendship in some ways. Am I getting that right? Am I reading too much into Scripture when I say that?
No, I don't think so at all. I think we are wired for community. We are wired for relationship. We need it. And again, one of the case studies in the book is King Solomon. And what was so tragic is he wrote in the book of Proverbs, he knew how important friendships were. And one of the things that he said, wounds from a friend can be trusted. He's like, you need it. You need friends in your life that tell you when you're going off track. You need friends that really know you and can call you on some things. That is a gift that can be trusted. And then you look at his actual life, and do you know how many times we see anyone challenging Solomon on any of his decisions, on any of the times that he is slowly getting off track? Exactly 0. Whereas
Yeah.
his father David had Nathan that came to him, it had Joab, his commander. We see 0 instances of anyone ever calling him. And I guess the question for all of us is, when was the last time a friend inflicted a few wounds? When is the last time someone called you? And if it is a while, there's only 2 options. One, you haven't made any mistakes. Or 2, we might not have any friends that know us well enough to call us to inflict a few wounds that can be trusted. And so I would say isolation is utterly lethal for leaders that want to live and serve faithfully. It is
Yes.
utterly lethal. And so the question for all of us is, who are we doing life with? And when was the last time we invited friends to inflict a few wounds to help keep us on track and on mission in our lives?
Well, finally, Peter, I just want to come back to the idea that we introduced earlier and just make the point that God owns it all. We're just stewards. We're our roles, our time in leadership, whatever that might be, is short, even the longest of it. And I think that if we keep that in mind, if we keep that idea that we're just stewards and that God is sovereign, um, that goes a long way towards helping us stay on task, doesn't it?
It sure does. Yep. I mean, it's not complex. fear God and keep his commands. Like, let's do it. Let's love
Yeah.
God. Let's love others. But how do we actually do that today? That's where I think yeah, the research, the writing, all of it is to say, let's connect that end with what we do today. And Lord help us to live and serve on mission.
Well, Peter Greer, thank you so much. Your co-author, Jill Heisey. Did I pronounce her name right?
Yes, Jill Heisey.
Jill Heisey, thank you so much for this book, How Leaders Lose Their Way. I found it to be very nourishing, and I'm sure I'm going to come back to it again and again and again. I'm grateful for it. And stick around, and I'll give you an opportunity to get to our listeners. I'll give you an opportunity to get a copy for yourself. But until then, Peter, thanks so much. God bless you.
Thank you, Warren.